time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I'm John Dickerson. Join me for the Daily Report, weekdays on CBS News 24/7.
I'm parachuting into France. There's a ditch we need to clear. It's a Charlie Daggett in a parachute above Normandy, and hopefully landing safely.
What would it mean to NATO and to the U.S.-French relationship should French troops be sent to Ukraine?
I think the most important was the message behind it, that it was we are going to support Ukraine as long as it takes.
We need to let people in legally. We need people here to experience the freedoms that we have.
What do you see as the significance of African American men in this election?
Thank you, everybody.
For both of you.
I see them identifying with Trump.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. In Delaware, day 3 of Hunter Biden's federal gun trial has just wrapped up. We've got more on today's testimony from his ex-wife and an FBI special agent. Scott McFarland will join us from Wilmington. But first up, President Biden is in France to mark 80 years since D-Day. He'll meet World War II veterans, attend a state dinner hosted by French President Emmanuel Macron, and discuss the ongoing war in Ukraine with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe traveling with the president and joins us now from Paris. Ed, quite an assignment. It's not Lower Manhattan's criminal court. How is it over there, and what's on the agenda for the president beyond visiting Normandy?
Well, Bob, good evening. The president wrapping up what was a full day of closed-door prep, in essence, for the next 4 days. As you mentioned, there's the Normandy anniversary tomorrow. There's a speech he's giving on Friday that's designed to be a major address about his concerns about the future of democracy, not just in the United States, but across Europe and around the world, similar to the themes once expressed by former President Ronald Reagan in a speech he gave 40 years ago at the same spot where Biden will speak on Friday. Saturday, as you mentioned, is the big state visit for the president. He'll get the full French military honors with a parade in the streets of Paris, followed by meetings with President Macron, a state dinner, and then Sunday, in what I think you and I would agree is probably one of the more intriguing moments of this trip, he's going to go to a French-American military cemetery where soldiers and Marines who died during World War I, American soldiers and Marines, are buried. This was a spot that back in 2018, former President Trump was scheduled to visit, but had to postpone the trip due to bad weather and concerns about taking a 50-mile motorcade up there. But it was later revealed that he called those buried at that location losers and suckers, something the former president strongly still denies, but that the current president, as a candidate, seized upon as an example of why Trump couldn't be taken seriously on matters of national security, military, and veterans affairs, and something that's, in essence, stuck in the craw of the president ever since. So by going to this place, not explicitly calling out the former president while he's there, at least that's not what is expected to happen, but by going at all, it's yet another opportunity for him, and this time on the world stage, to contrast himself with his likely opponent.
There's nothing more powerful, perhaps, than visiting some of these cemeteries abroad. I remember I went to a U.S. cemetery, military cemetery once in Cambridge, England, and it's just so moving to think about World War II and the joint sacrifice of all of those involved in the effort. And while the president's focused on remembering 80 years on those who were on the beaches, what else is really looming over this trip, Ed, when you talk to White House sources, especially when it comes to dealing with Europeans and their view of what's going on with Ukraine and with Israel?
Let's start with the Middle East. There is general agreement between the United States and France over how that war needs to be ended, but there's a specific difference when it comes to the International Criminal Court. France is a major supporter and benefactor of it, and of course it recently issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and leaders of Hamas. We spoke before the trip began with the French ambassador to the United States, Laurent Billy, about those differences. Take a listen to what he had to say. Is it fair to say the United States and France are on different pages when it comes to the conflict in Gaza?
Not really. Opposition is a bit more subtle than that. That in principle we support the ICC, but we said that we were examining the case. We didn't say that we were supporting the due decision. It's more a general principle that we know that we need ICC, and if we want ICC to be competent when it comes to Russia, we can't just pick and choose when the ICC have got a role to play. On the main elements of the conflict, I think we can say that we agree, like strong condemnation of the terrorist attack, the right of Israel to self-defense, but also the importance for Israel to respect the international law. When we have differences, it's more on the path, but because I think also that on the end game, we also think that we need a two-state solution, that without a two-state solution, the history will repeat itself.
You, like the president here, says you support a two-state solution. Some other European countries have gone so far now as to recognize a Palestinian state. Is France going to go that far?
We have had a very strong debate on the issue. We think that it's something that should happen, but we want also that decision to happen in a moment where it helps the process. And so after full consideration, we think that it was probably not the right moment to do it, because we wanted that recognition to be part of a process and achieve some results.
More urgently, perhaps here in Europe, of course, is the war in Ukraine. Again, general agreement between the United States, France, and NATO allies that the war needs to be ended, that Russia needs to end its assault on Ukraine. But France has recently suggested it's willing to go farther than other NATO partners and would consider sending French troops into Ukraine to help defend against Russia. I asked the ambassador what that might look like and whether that puts its relationship with NATO and the United States at risk.
I think the most important was the message behind it, that it was we are going to support Ukraine as long as it takes, and we don't see a situation where Russia winning can be a loss for all of us. And so that was somehow reinserting a part of strategic ambiguity, so as how far we are ready to go, just to make sure that the other side understand that it's not going to be an easy journey.
And you would do that outside of NATO, potentially?
These kind of decisions are national decisions, and that's a sovereign decision that we will take.
It dawns on me, the president is going to Europe, where Ukraine is always on the mind, whereas here in the United States, that war, that story, really has fallen off the front pages and out of the consciousness of many Americans. What do they need to know about what is going on right now and how worried Europe remains about what could happen?
Well, I think the situation is tough, and one of the reasons is also our delay to provide the necessary support to Ukraine. And I think in 1984, Ronald Reagan made an impressive speech in Pointe du Hoc, and recalling that to think that we are in isolation of the rest of the world usually doesn't work. And what is at stake in Europe, in Ukraine, is much more than some would like to portray it, a regional issue. It's a much more systemic challenge to what we have been trying to build since World War II. And a first conventional war in Europe of that scale, it's something that matters, that's something that is observed, that's probably something that has been encouraging other players in their reckless actions and may encourage others. So I think we have to think globally of what is at stake, and the ceremony in Normandy are probably a good moment for that thinking.
So the future of the war in Ukraine, the future of the conflict in the Middle East, climate change, how to deal with China, the future of democracy on this continent and around the world, some really big issues for the two leaders to discuss in the coming days, Bob.
A lot of important issues, but special for you to also cover the anniversary 80 years after D-Day. Ed O'Keefe, thank you for your reporting, as always. Now to Wilmington, Delaware, where prosecutors called on Kathleen Buell, Hunter Biden's first wife and the mother of 3 of his 5 children, to testify today. Hunter Biden's ex-girlfriend, Zoe Keston, took the stand after. An FBI special agent and the man who sold a gun to Hunter Biden back in 2018 also testified today. Scott McFarland with CBS is outside the courthouse in Wilmington, Delaware. Scott, great to see you. What were the prosecutors seeking to accomplish in calling some of these personal associates of Mr. Biden to the stand?
They're not just trying to paint a picture, Bob. They're trying to paint a calendar into the minds of jurors. What they're alleging in this case, the charges are that Hunter Biden knowingly possessed a gun in October 2018 while using or addicted to drugs and made false statements filling out the paperwork to get that gun. What they have through their witnesses today is a timetable leading up to October 2018. Zoe Keston, with whom Hunter Biden was romantically involved in 2018, testified that not only did Hunter Biden frequently buy and use crack cocaine, that he did so as close to that gun purchase date as September 2018, within weeks of the gun purchase. They also called Biden's ex-wife, Kathleen Buell, to testify about how she found a crack pipe in their Washington, D.C. home before their divorce in 2015. She also testified, Bob, that Hunter Biden refused her initial request that he go into rehab and that she searched the family car to ensure the kids who drove the car frequently didn't find drugs themselves.
Scott, the man who sold the gun at the center of this trial, he took the stand and will return to the stand tomorrow. In the view of the prosecution, how important is his testimony in this case?
That man is Gordon Cleveland of Wilmington, Delaware. They're trying to put some meat on the bones of that key accusation that there was a form Hunter Biden filled out and gave to Gordon Cleveland's store in which he didn't mark, as required in the federal background check, that he was a user or addict of drugs. And the entirety of this trial is the Department of Justice special counsel trying to prove Hunter Biden not only was addicted or using drugs, but that he knew he was and made false statements filling out that gun shop form. There are about 6 more witnesses left, Bob. The prosecution could rest this thing tomorrow and give it to the defense. If you blink, you miss big chunks of this trial. It's on quite a fast track.
Scott McFarland, thank you. We appreciate it. A Georgia appeals court has paused former President Trump's election interference case down there. The Georgia Court of Appeals today issued a stay as the former president and 8 others seek to remove Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis as the prosecutor. The judge overseeing the case previously ruled Willis could remain on it after she admitted to having been romantically involved with the special prosecutor whom she hired. Arguments have been scheduled for October 4th. Trump and 18 others were indicted in Georgia back in August for their alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 election in Georgia. 4 of them have since taken plea deals.
We must face the simple truth. To protect America as a land that welcomes immigrants, we must first secure the border and secure it now.
President Biden facing criticism from some Democrats and Republicans after his executive action regarding border crossings. Senior Biden advisor Tom Perez will join us next to discuss all of it. You're streaming America Decides.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
That Desired Farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Past Republican obstruction and using the executive authorities available to me as president to do what I can on my own to address the border.
President Biden criticized Republicans yesterday after he unveiled new executive actions regarding asylum seekers at our southern border. The long-awaited order is a major shift for the administration's immigration policy. Joining us to discuss it is senior advisor and assistant to President Biden, Tom Perez. He joins us now from the White House. He's also the director of the White House's Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. Good to see you, sir. Thanks for being here with us.
Good to be with you, Robert.
You have heard the outrage from some Democrats about this on Capitol Hill. Outrage, sometimes disappointment. What would you say to them when they say this is a step too far for someone they believe is an ally in President Biden?
Well, what I would say is the following. The president continues to believe that we are a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants. And we tried, and we had a bipartisan bill that was in the Senate, not once but twice. They turned it down. Would have had 1,500 new Border Patrol agents, would have had thousands of new asylum officers, would have had new asylum judges, money to combat the fentanyl crisis by putting technology at the border to detect fentanyl. These are important efforts, and they're not the only thing the president wanted to do. I would remind our friends that the president introduced comprehensive immigration reform day one. The best solutions are bipartisan solutions, like the one we had in 1996 when he was a senator. And unfortunately, Republicans want to demonize this issue. They want to weaponize it for political purposes. And so the president had to take this action. And what I would further say is the president was very clear in his speech that we have to secure the border. And he explicitly said, and in the weeks ahead, we're going to also be talking about how to make our immigration system more just and fair.
So the president believes he was stymied by Congress, took executive action. It's an understandable move in the sense that presidents have often taken executive action when they feel like they can't get what they want together with Congress. But what is the actual reality of this executive order, Mr. Perez, when you think about the undocumented worker who's here in the United States right now? What is the direct effect this order would have on their life?
Well, someone who's already here, who's awaiting an asylum hearing, you know, what we've tried to do in the bipartisan bill was add more asylum officers so that we could hear cases faster. One of the biggest pull factors that drives people to come to the United States is the fact that our asylum system is overwhelmed right now. And while it should take 6 months to adjudicate an asylum case, and the reality, as the president pointed out, is it's taking up to 6 years. And so the smugglers know that, and they bring people to the border, and they take advantage of them, and we can't have that. It's a danger to them, and the system is overwrought. That's why the president did what he did moving forward. And we're continuing to work very closely with the government of Mexico, and we've been able to reduce the flows by about 60% over the last few months as a result of the cooperation with Mexico. But we still have more work to do. And absent cooperation from the Republicans in Congress, the president had no choice. And we're going to continue to monitor the situation. But I think this was a necessary step that he had to take.
What do you need specifically from the new leadership in Mexico to make this work efficiently in the eyes of the administration?
Well, we've had a lot of collaboration and cooperation. The president spoke to President López Obrador twice in the last few days and has been in regular contact. Our teams have been in regular contact. And if you look actually at the entire region, we've been working together with the 22 countries in the hemisphere. What we've done, among other things, Robert, just to give your viewers an example of the innovation we've put in place, we have secure mobility offices. These are locations in the region. So you can go to Costa Rica, rather than taking that treacherous trip through the Darien Gap, go to Costa Rica and make an application. We've been putting those secure mobility offices elsewhere in the region. Those are examples of things we're doing. We have lawful pathway programs. What we're trying to do is get people to come to the port of entries. Don't enter between the port of entries. It's dangerous, and you can get hurt, you can die. And so the collaboration with Mexico has been indispensable to our success in lowering the encounters. But we still have to do more, and we were obviously, we've communicated with the government of Mexico. I'm very confident that the collaboration that has been in place for quite some time will continue with them.
Between now and the election, do you believe talks on immigration on Capitol Hill are effectively dead because of the campaign politics that surround the issue? Or do you really believe there's a possibility of legislation before November?
Well, I mean, Donald Trump has made clear. We had a bipartisan deal negotiated. It was a tough deal. I mean, again, 1,500 more Border Patrol agents, 4,000 more asylum officers, more asylum judges, more money to combat fentanyl. The Border Patrol Union endorsed the proposal. Why did it fail? Because Donald Trump said, we can't give Joe Biden a victory. That's not how governance works. It's not
so you're
about
not
who
optimistic.
wins and loses. No, I'm not optimistic because, the other side has clearly said we want to weaponize the issue. We don't want to solve the problem. Robert, what's really telling is when the president announced what he said yesterday, he was surrounded by border city mayors along the Texas-Arizona border. These are folks who, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, they don't want this political football. They just want problem solved.
And I ran into some of those members, Democratic members, after the White House event, and some of them were telling me privately they're glad the president did this because they're in tough districts where this issue is at the fore of people's minds. But those in more progressive districts and some urban areas feel a lot differently. This is an issue. We'll have to have you keep coming back, Tom Perez. We really appreciate you coming by this time. Thanks for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Robert.
President Biden in France, as we've discussed, marking 80 years since D-Day as the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East loom over the trip. You're streaming America Decides.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Residents, please evacuate. acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case. It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. Susan Glasser, my old friend, joins us now. She's a staff writer at The New Yorker. Susan, great to see you. Thanks for stopping by. President Biden in Europe for D-Day, and we're all thinking about D-Day 80 years on, but it's also an important moment for a president who has long focused on foreign policy. What are you paying close attention to as you watch Biden abroad?
Yeah, I mean, this is quite a remarkable trip. I mean, I know it comes in the middle of this election year, but just to take a step outside of that, right? Biden, already 81 years old, is almost certainly, he is the last American president who will have been alive when D-Day occurred. He is in many ways the last American president who is kind of carrying the torch for this era of what has been called the American century that resulted in the aftermath of the U.S. victory in World War II and defeat of Nazi Germany. And, I think that it resonates for Biden and for the remnant of his generation in a way that perhaps is lost on many younger Americans. But it really, it's an event that shaped his worldview. And so I think it's really significant for him to be there and to mark the passing of the living memory of that time.
Susan, you and Peter Baker have written some terrific books over the years, including a fascinating study of Russia and the rise of Vladimir Putin. How do you believe Putin, as this war unfolds in Ukraine, is watching President Biden and assessing Biden's articulation of what you just outlined, those themes about the American century and traditional foreign policy?
Well, a couple points to make on that, Bob. First of all, Putin, I should say, has taken that cult of victory in World War II and obviously the Soviet Union and Russia as its successor state. World War II victory has become almost the foundational myth of Putin's Russia too, but in a very different way. He has perverted the memory of that war to justify, in a way, his invasion of his neighbor in Ukraine. He calls Ukraine's first and only Jewish president somehow a Nazi, and uses this cult of World War II victory to rally and militarize the Russian people. So he has a very different take on the continuing resonance and legacy 80 years after the fact of World War II. He also, of course, consistently ignores or diminishes the U.S.-Soviet partnership that was the key to winning the war. In the Russian view of the war, it was all about the incredible Russian sacrifices that led to the victory. And there's very little narrative, by the way, about D-Day in Russia. If you go there, it's a huge story for us in the West, and basically not at all in Russia in terms of the story of World War II. How does that relate to today? And your question, I believe that Vladimir Putin thinks that unlike the allies in World War II, the United States today is too inwardly divided, and it does not have what it takes to stay the course and pushing back against Putin in Ukraine or elsewhere.
And just quickly here, stepping back, looking at President Biden's executive order on immigration, you've written extensively about the Reagan era, a great book on James Baker, the former chief of staff to Reagan. This is an issue that vexed Reagan. It's an issue that now vexes President Biden. What do you make of the president's latest move? Quickly.
You know, Ronald Reagan was a supporter of legal immigration to the United States, and there was a very significant 1986 bipartisan bill that Reagan signed, very different than Donald Trump and today's Republican Party, which is, you know, taken immigration demagoguery at its core of Trump's message. I think that, you know, for Biden, it's late in the day to take this kind of action. He will disgruntle a certain number of his allies on the left without in any way achieving any converts among those who say that immigration is their big issue. Those are probably people who are already with Donald Trump. Will it be effective from a policy point of view? I don't know, because it's going to be tied up in the courts almost certainly.
Susan Glasser of The New Yorker, always appreciate your insights in your writing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll get a little bit from 50 Cent and his political analysis. Our Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill will explain what we mean by all of that. You're streaming America Decides.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go.
You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
It can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
The Senate has failed now to advance a bill to protect access to contraception, and Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced they will vote on IVF protections next week in the Senate. But on Capitol Hill today, it was a rapper who got a lot of attention. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us. Nicole, you got a chance to catch up with 50 Cent. What did 50 have to say?
Well, 50 or 50, depending on how you refer to him. I mean, look, he was up here for a specific reason. He was accompanied by civil rights attorney Ben Crump, and he really wanted to advocate for generational wealth when it comes to African Americans in particular. He has a number of companies, including one that involves spirits, and so he wants to see an increase in minority representation. You know, he felt that he didn't get a fair shake when he first started his business and wants to expand opportunities again for people of color. So that was the nature of his visit. But in that context, I did ask him about the election because the Biden administration has done a lot of work in this space. But at the same time, 50 Cent has made comments in the past, including back in 2020, where he suggested that people vote for then President Trump, although he later walked those comments back. So I asked him what he's thinking about the upcoming election. Take a listen. I mean, we're heading into another election, so have you made a decision about who you're going to support?
I'm not sure how to answer that question, to be honest with you.
Have you made a decision?
I haven't.
What do you see as the significance of African American men in this election for both of you?
I see them identifying with Trump.
Why do you say that?
Because they got RICO charges.
And I don't know if he was referencing the case down in Georgia, where we, of course, know that former President Trump has been charged and is facing RICO charges in that state. But that aside, you know, what is significant about his comments is that, again, back in 2020, his then support briefly of former President Trump got a lot of attention. And being a major figure like that, you know, that can be influential when it comes to the African American vote. And so similarly, we know both campaigns are really trying to advocate for the black vote. We have seen the president's support slip among African American voters. The issue even garnering a lot of attention here on Capitol Hill in a separate issue with a leader, Hakeem Jeffries, and Byron Donalds kind of now in an internal beef because Byron Donalds made some comments at a campaign event just yesterday suggesting that African Americans were better under Jim Crow, to which Hakeem Jeffries replied on the House floor today that is an outlandish statement and ignorant. So that being said, you know, this is all about both sides really trying to advocate and make their case to African American voters. But as you can see, there are a number of different perspectives around this, not only from lawmakers, but also from celebrities as well.
Quite a time to be a Capitol Hill correspondent, Nicole. Thank you. The Trump campaign and his super PAC supporting his candidacy are touting massive fundraising hauls since Thursday's guilty verdict. The super PAC MAGA Inc. says they've raised $70 million in May. They are planning to spend $100 million on an ad blitz that runs through Labor Day. Let's bring in our political panel, Jasmine Wright and Stephanie Lai. Jasmine is a politics reporter at Notice, a nonprofit newsroom here in Washington. Stephanie is a national politics reporter at Bloomberg. So great to have both of you here. I know we could linger on 50 Cent's visit to Capitol Hill, but let's move on to the campaign. Jasmine, we'll begin with you. A lot of money coming in for the Trump campaign, but to what end?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's significant for a couple of reasons, but mostly because throughout this campaign, there's been a narrative that former President Trump, his campaign, the RNC, just weren't raising enough money to chip away at the major cash haul that President Biden and his joint venture with the DNC have been able to raise. And so that $141 million in May, of course, we still have to wait until the FECs verify that number. And of course, $53 million just 24 hours after the verdict is going to be helpful in making sure that they can fund what they need to fund, pay for who they need to pay, and really try to get their message out particularly when we're talking about communities that Nicole was talking about, African-American communities, something that this campaign has said that they're continuously trying to reach out to, but we haven't really seen much on that front. The same with Latinos. The question, though, I think going forward is how much is going to be directed to former President Trump's legal issues. That's something that Laura Trump with the RNC was asked a couple of days ago. She hasn't been able to say. So how is that money going to be divided up? I think that's something that we'll have to wait and see. But it is helpful when trying to combat the Democrats and all the money that they've been able to raise.
Stephanie, when you talk to your sources in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party about the fallout from the guilty verdict in the last few days, what are you hearing? What have you learned?
I mean, I think we were expecting this for quite some time. A lot of Trump's allies had said weeks in advance, if it's a guilty verdict, they're going to make a ton of money. There's going to be a lot of outrage. And I think we saw that with these latest fundraising announcements. The MAGA Inc. memo that they released, I guess the internal memo that we received, basically stated that a lot of people were donating to the campaign, to the super PAC, because of precisely this reason. And I think what's notable from the campaign side is that they said that in the month of May, the majority of their donations were roughly $70. It's coming from the average American. It's coming from voters who are upset with what they saw play out.
What are you both watching, and we'll start with you, Jasmine, on the vice presidential search for Trump? I've heard North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, Senator Marco Rubio, Senator J.D. Vance, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. Is that the short list, or are there more names out there, and are there variables in the discussion?
I mean, I think that it's yes to both of those options, right? Yes, that is the core group. That's who we hear about the most. That's who we see on not just Republican-favored TV programs on Sunday shows, but also ones that are a bit more defensive of the Republican platform. But as I talk to the Trump campaign and folks there, they consistently say that until Donald J. Trump says who his VP contender is, nobody knows who it is. So I expect that they're going to cast a wide net, talk to a lot of people, ask people for various forms as it gets closer to July, when the RNC is, when Trump has said that he will name his nominee. I think that there are a lot of different issues under consideration, but most importantly, I think is going to be not just the personality of the person, but who can stand beside Trump, not overshadowing him, but really complimenting him. I think that that is what this campaign is really looking for.
And what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think to add to that, one thing that we've been tracking for quite some time is that loyalty is a huge issue for the president. They're not looking for someone who's going to not see through with this agenda, and that seems to be the biggest point that they're looking for right now. Earlier there was a lot of reporting that he was looking for someone who might help him win certain electorates or certain voter blocks. But that doesn't seem to be super necessary this cycle, because he just has so much name ID and because he's already polling pretty well, or significantly better than in the past with a lot of these key groups, like the Latino vote, the Asian American vote, the Black vote. So it seems like, in terms of picking a VP, it doesn't necessarily need to fit the boxes that we used to think it would have to fit.
And this is a summer where the convention's going to be a big thing. The sentencing is also going to be a major moment before the conventions in July. When you're talking to voters and to strategists as well, do former President Trump's legal challenges factor in a major way? Is this a seismic moment, or is it just something that's kind of already baked into the conversation for most voters because Trump's conduct's obviously been an issue for nearly a decade since he came down that escalator?
I mean, I think it's absolutely a seismic moment just because we haven't seen it before. And I know that tons of polls were asking voters whether or not they would change their mind, or whether or not Trump would be eliminated if he was convicted. And I just don't think that we've necessarily seen the results of those polls just because it happened so quickly. So I think it's absolutely seismic.
Certainly. I mean, I think a lot of voters actually haven't been thinking about this or following the hush money trial as closely as some Democratic operatives might have thought they would. I think some polling had shown maybe about 50 to 60 people aren't paying any attention. So there is a chance that this actually doesn't have the impact that we thought it might.
Jasmine Wright, Stephanie Lai, we hope you both come back. Thanks so much for the conversation. We appreciate it. And last week, President Biden sat down with Time Magazine for a wide-ranging interview. We'll speak to the writer who spoke with the president. That's coming up next. You're streaming America Decides.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
How fast do you think you were going? 195 miles an hour. This is incredible.
How close did you actually come to being killed?
That close.
Is this brain surgery without a knife?
It is.
What risk do these children pose to Russia?
I'm not sure the world is prepared for this change.
Definitely not.
Who's the best coach in college football today?
Let me see a mirror.
It's time for the CBS News original, 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
This is CBS.
In an interview with Time magazine, an extensive one, President Biden was asked if Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is prolonging the war for, quote, political self-preservation. Biden said, quote, there is every reason for people to draw that conclusion. Times Washington Bureau Chief Massimo Calabresi, who spoke to President Biden, joins us now. We appreciate you stopping by. These have been powerful interviews provided by Time magazine, former President Trump a few weeks ago, now your interview with President Biden. He talked to you a lot about what's going on with Israel, what's going on in the Middle East. But what struck me was the beginning of the interview, where he really underscored his broader view of American foreign policy as he looks ahead to 2025. What should we expect if Biden wins another term on foreign policy? What's the vision? What's the theme that he articulated to you?
So that's what you're quite right. The most fascinating thing about this interview for me is he really does have an idea of what America's role in the world should be, and it comes out of his own personal experience as a foreign policy hand on in the Senate, and having grown up in the sort of the post-World War II world, and it's an alliance-based foreign policy led by the United States, a vision of the U.S. as a kind of enlightened, self-interested superpower. Spreading democracy around the world. As a practical matter, that means building relationships in Europe with like-minded allies. It means building alliances of convenience in the Middle East in furtherance of U.S. interests. And most of all, it means trying to marshal as many potential partners and allies to constrain and compete with China in the Far East, where we face, for the first time, a potential peer in military and economic power.
You had the chance to sit down with the President of the United States in depth, and he talked a lot about former President Donald Trump, his rival now in the 2024 race. Characterize, as a reporter, President Biden's tone, his energy, his positioning when it came to sitting across from you and talking about Trump. Was it kind of a resignation? Was it dismissive? Was it angry? What was he like when he spoke about Trump to you?
You know, I mean, it's worth thinking for a moment. It was mostly contextual. It was what he said Trump would mean for the country. It certainly didn't have a sort of a personal tone. It was more, he said, for example, that at almost every international meeting he attends, he's pulled aside by leaders who say you can't let Trump win, let him win. So it was more in the context of what he said or was arguing Trump would mean for the country, especially with regard to foreign affairs, but in general as well. So I would characterize it as less personal than sort of contextual.
How does he view his own domestic record? Some of his associates have told me over the last few years, I mean, he really came in trying to compete not just with his predecessor, President Obama, on the Democratic side, but wanted to have echoes of FDR and have this sweeping spending program domestically. As he looks toward November, does he feel confident he's gotten what he wanted done, or has Congress stopped him and has he felt like his hands have been tied?
Well, he boasted of domestic accomplishments at various points. He said no president has gotten as much done in 3.5 years in memory. He's certainly running on that. Doesn't give the impression of frustration. If anything, what he and his aides tend to do is say that he doesn't get sufficient credit for what he's done. There's any number of criticisms. We spoke with a number of people, both sort of nonpartisan observers and Republicans, critical of that agenda, of course. But no, I think he's feeling, certainly to hear him tell it, fairly confident about what he managed to get done.
We're going to have to leave it there. A powerful interview. I'd recommend you all read Time Magazine, Massimo's interview with President Biden. It's great to sometimes just sit down and digest these long-form interviews with someone who has so much power. Thanks so much for being here, Massimo. We appreciate it. Coming up, we have a lot coming up. In 2020, as you remember, President Biden flipped one of America's key swing counties back to the Democrats. But how are voters reacting to the president's new border rules? We'll go there to find out.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that?
Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
This really is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean?
What does that mean?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has a glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding their perspective.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education.
Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
When people say who's first to get in the morning, that would be me. Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here. We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way. We'll take you places. We teach you new things. And we make you feel like, you know, it's not all bad.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
People across the United States are reacting to the president's new executive actions aimed at curbing the number of illegal crossings at the southern border. This includes Americans in the battleground state of Pennsylvania. That's where CBS News campaign reporter Torian Small joins us now. Torian, always good to see you out on the campaign trail. Torian, as you know, in a recent CBS News poll, more than half of Pennsylvania voters labeled the U.S.-Mexico border a major factor in their vote this upcoming November. What have they been telling you about the president's new policy decisions?
Well, Bob, even Democrats I talked to out here say this aggressive action, this executive order in lieu of congressional action is a true pivot point for the president. A lot of Democratic voters out here say that they were expecting the president to especially act on this sooner than later because immigration is a true sticking point for on-the-fence moderate Republicans that they know in their communities. Take a listen to what Terry Hahn, a 73-year-old Democrat, told me when I talked to him today about it.
I feel that we need to let people in legally. We need people here to experience the freedoms that we have. But in the context of high crime, I think a lot of people are paranoid about letting anybody in. So I think that there's extremes on both sides. I think we have to find a middle ground to appease everyone.
Terry there echoing what he told me, conversations that he had with some of his friends who are on the opposite sides of the political spectrum. And what's interesting, this county, Northampton County, is a pivot county. It's one that voted for Obama twice, Trump, and then Biden, a crucial area Joe Biden has to win in order to hope to build up his coalition here in Pennsylvania to win in November.
Speaking of President Biden, how are voters talking about the president?
Yeah, voters are telling me that, again, this action, it could be seen as a little too late for Republicans, but Democrats say, yes, they also were expecting the president to move a little bit more aggressively sooner on this action. Two voters I talked to here that you'll listen to in a bit also split on their thoughts on the president's action on immigration. The Democrat, though, what the Democrat says is especially telling. Take a listen.
I don't believe he's done a good job, because in the major cities there's a lot of crime and a lot of people that should not be in this country. And I don't take offense to that to anybody. It's just how it is.
I think we need to do something, and that's certainly a good initiative. It would have been nice if we had been able to do something bipartisan when he brought that up. And it's too bad that the Republicans and Trump pushed that down several months ago. But at least he's doing what he can to help out.
That last voter there, Robbie Roseman, he is a lifelong Democrat, and like you just heard him say, something needed to be done, and he was expecting this to happen sooner than later. The political ramifications of this executive order he's watching, but he believes that if the president is to persuade moderate voters, on the fence voters, he has to act on immigration. Still a top issue for voters, even here in Pennsylvania, not necessarily a border state.
Torian Small, we appreciate your reporting as ever. Thank you. It looks like the third time was the charm for Boeing's Starliner after technical issues scrubbed two previous launches. The astronauts on board the spacecraft are finally on their way to the International Space Station. If the mission is successful, NASA could certify Boeing as the second commercial operator to ferry crews to the ISS. The ship is expected to return to Earth on June 14th. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for June 5th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. After enormous acts of perseverance and patience in the face of delays, the liftoff of the 197-foot Boeing Starliner has taken